world.
Half of the stadium is probably occupied by the supporters of two teams which are coming from different countries with different diseases that may require specific attention because the risks are different.
How attending a World Cup final, any World Cup final, could be hazardous to your health. And the humanitarian needs of the people in Gaza remain widespread and acute.
A sizable portion of our appeal also aims to protect the rights of refugees and improve their access to basic emergency health, water, sanitation, education, and temporary shelter.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Hello and thanks again for your company. First, let's head to a country that dominated the news in the latter part of last century, as ethnic tensions in the former Yugoslavia saw Serbs, Albanians and others fight a bloody and horrible conflict. Finally, on the 10th of June 1999, the UN Security Council passed a resolution which placed Kosovo under transitional UN administration and established KFOR, a NATO-led peacekeeping force. It has been a complicated and detailed transition, and today Kosovo is a Balkan nation struggling to rise above a legacy of conflict in a period of significant worldwide economic difficulty. Mike Mielberger has been speaking to the people of Kosovo and discovers feelings of both pride and apprehension.
Kosovo has seen much progress since its declaration of independence in 2008. One of the most visible signs is the construction boom in the capital, Pristina. Apartment high-rises like these have sprung up all over town, but many of them stand empty, far beyond the reach of most people in a country where the average income is around €250 a month. Pristina's first shopping mall is as modern as any other in Europe, but again, for most locals, this mall is just a glimmer of what the future may hold in store for them. How to jumpstart the economy is the biggest concern on people's minds as they head into 2012. Kosovo has the highest unemployment rate in Europe, 45%, almost 75% among young people. At a second-hand car market on the outskirts of Pristina, we meet Fatmir. He's returned to his hometown after having worked in Germany for the last few years.
I'm unemployed at the moment. I worked in a restaurant, then I had my own business, but due to the crisis in Europe, it failed.
Fatmir has come home with a car he's looking to sell.
Most cars here come from Germany. For a second-hand car like this, you have to work for a year in Kosovo. But if you make a bit on the side, like by selling used cars or whatever, you can get by.
By working in Germany, Fatmir was able to send back money to support his family. According to UN estimates, 1 in 5 households in Kosovo are dependent on remittances. The country's economic growth is one of the lowest in the Balkans. Fatmir is becoming impatient. The border dispute with Serbia hasn't helped, he says. It's obstructing trade.
Kosovo is a beautiful country and the KFOR soldiers or NATO soldiers are very welcome here. But I must say that now, after 10 years, many people are becoming impatient because they associate many of the problems they still face today with international organisations. At first they were all very interested in helping Kosovo, but then they started to lose interest, and only now we are getting a bit more attention again, but not because of us, only because Serbia wants to become an EU candidate.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
For a long time, NATO's peacekeeping mission in Kosovo received hardly any media attention, as the security situation remained calm. Troop numbers were steadily reduced to their current level of about 6,000. But since July last year, Kosovo has been in the headlines again. A row between Belgrade and Pristina over trade and control of disputed border crossings triggered clashes in the north of Kosovo between local demonstrators and KFOR peacekeepers. In November, some 30 NATO soldiers were injured as they moved to clear a roadblock. Many Kosovars feel KFOR should do more to clear the roadblocks and enforce the freedom of movement.
We Albanians feel at a disadvantage by the way that KFOR and the EU have been tolerating the troubles in the north. Many feel that if we, as Albanians, had caused half as much trouble with blockades, then NATO and the EU would have intervened more forcefully.
But NATO says it does not take sides and vows to remain impartial.
And also yourself is very quiet here in the south, and there's no violence going on in the north between Serbia and Albania. There's no violence.
My KFOR guide tells Fatmir that the mission is focused on de-escalating tensions and promoting dialogue, a principle they both agree is the only way forward.
We've been neighbours for a long time and we have to live together. Nothing else is going to work. We have to accept them and they must accept us. We're still learning and we hope that NATO will continue to support us. Despite our problems right now, we will never forget what NATO's done for us. We think democracy has arrived here.
Just a year ago, Europe's youngest democracy held its first general election. Like much of the progress in this country, it was marred by allegations of fraud. Besides its economy, Kosovo's democratic institutions still need support for some time to come, if the country is to realize its dream of a future within Europe.
We have a dream of becoming a part of Europe again. Geographically we are already, but not officially right now. But we dream of belonging to Europe again one day, like others in the Balkans.
I'm Mike Mühlberger reporting from Kosovo.
It has taken 1 billion doses of oral polio vaccine, but the results have been impressive. India has completed 1 year without recording a single polio case. That's an extraordinary turnaround, according to the World Health Organization. 2 years ago, India had half the cases of polio in the world. To achieve these results, 170 million children under the age of 5 were vaccinated annually. Sonabari spoke to Jocelyn Sambira about the scope of work involved in ridding India of the polio virus.
Over a decade of reaching every child in every household, month after month, the sheer commitment required from the ground up, be it vaccinators, communities, parents, leaders at the local level, but also state governments and the central government. A lot of persistence and perseverance. The second is innovation. One of them was a new, more effective vaccine, ways of reaching migrant and mobile groups. These children move around and are very difficult to reach with any kind of health service. Then I would say mobilizing communities was a huge part of this innovation. India quickly understood that communities needed to buy into this, parents needed to understand the importance of vaccination. A third, I would say, is accountability. The Indian government, state level, central level, held very strong lines of accountability. So if you were a district magistrate in a particular area or you were a local official, you were accountable for making sure children in your area are vaccinated. And this went through all levels, the government as well as the partners, WHO, UNICEF, Rotary. All of us had a very strong accountability mechanism. And the final thing that played a role in India's success is funding. The government of India has spent $2 billion on polio eradication, a consistent stream of financing.
How many lives would you say have been saved?
Well, polio, as you know, is not a largely killer disease. What makes polio a target for eradication is that, first of all, technologically and biologically, it is possible to eradicate polio. It causes lifelong paralysis, in some cases death. But what it has done is over, I would say, the past 20 years, there were probably 7 million people walking who would not be otherwise, worldwide. And in India, if you count that there were 100,000 cases of paralysis, perhaps when this started, every year that's been diminished thanks to vaccination.
India was once considered the epicenter of polio. Can you give us a sense of how bad it really was?
India was the epicenter of polio in the sense that just 2 years ago, in 2009, India had over half the cases of polio in the world, 741 cases in India. And from there, within 2 years, to have 0 cases is extraordinary. Everybody said India will be the last place in the world where polio remains, and they've proven us wrong. It had a unique combination. The places where polio was endemic in India had the weakest health structures, big migrant communities, high population density, poor sanitation, and as a result, the vaccine worked less effectively than it did in other places. So it's an extraordinary turnaround.
Is it possible for India to keep polio out for good?
It's certainly possible. India, even today, has an emergency plan in place for any polio that enters the country from another country. It's maintaining very sensitive surveillance. The government is very aware that this is not the end of the road. This is a milestone, a very welcome milestone, but it's not the end of the road. It has to be extremely vigilant and respond very rapidly if there is a case of polio detected from now on.
Sonia Bari there, ending that report by Jocelyn Sambira about ridding India of the polio virus. Let's take a look at Libya now, and it would be unwise to expect that life in the country would resemble anything close to normal following the events of 2011, but unfortunately recent clashes between rival groups in northwestern Libya have left many people dead. Fighters between various towns are fighting machine guns and rockets at one another almost every day. These clashes represent the ongoing tensions between militia groups across the North African nation since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi last year. Al Jazeera's Erica Wood reports.
In scenes much like last year's civil war, injured fighters are again being rushed to hospital. This time, Muammar Gaddafi is no longer in power, but tensions remain between groups who are divided over loyalty.
They're supporters of the former regime still fighting and raising their green banner of shame. They lift their banners and fight.
These men are from Guardian, a town around 80 kilometres south of the capital Tripoli. They say they were fighting against others in neighbouring Asabia.
The shooting was started by Asabia fighters. Our fight is not against Asabia, but against those who are pro-Gaddafi. There's a huge stock of weaponry. This area hasn't been searched and disarmed. The weapons were not handed over to the defense ministry or the government, and the wanted people weren't turned in either.
And here lies the problem in Libya now. While the main battle may be over, there are still pockets of resistance across the country, and it's resistance that appears to be heavily armed.
There are still weapons in Asabia. The former military brigades are still over there, and they started to fire 23 caliber machine guns. We have only one or two of them, but they have 10.
This is not the first battle like this since the fall of Gaddafi. The past 2 weeks have seen several clashes, leading Libya's interim rulers to admit the level of weapons is out of control, and getting armed groups to lay down their arms is their biggest challenge ahead. Erica Wood, Al Jazeera.
It's hard to imagine how attending a major sporting event could be hazardous to your health. Well, people who gather in large crowds run a higher risk of catching communicable diseases, especially if that crowd is made up of people from different countries or cultures. The UN says these so-called mass gatherings can pose a risk to the health of an entire country, depending on what the surge capacity of the country has. In other words, how well it can respond to a sudden outbreak of a disease. Patrick Maguire has been speaking to Dr. Maurizio Barbesci in Italy about how these risks can be managed.
In Italy, we have every day a football match. We're 60, 70, 80,000 spectators. But if we host the finals of the Champions League, half of the stadium is probably occupied by the supporters of two teams which are coming from different countries with different diseases, with different behavioral patterns, different way of being supporting the team. That may require specific attention because the risks are different.
So mass gatherings are events that attract visitors from outside the borders of the specific country?
Mass gatherings are those events that are so difficult in risks.
What are some of the health risks or diseases that could be associated with mass gatherings?
All of those diseases that, for instance, are communicable or highly communicable, meningitis, measles, all of those are gastro-related. But also you may have heat stress, where the temperature of the games are particularly high. Of course, the opposite is true. So the analysis and the planning for any mass gathering is done managing and planning for the risks that are endemic, present in the country or in the host systems, or brought, like diseases or like behavior of certain funds from the outside.
Has there been any significant health risks or disease outbreaks that have been associated with mass gatherings in the recent past?
There were, for instance, large outbreaks of meningitis in the Hajj. They were an example of a disease like flu, seasonal flu, that happened in the last World Youth Day in Sydney. That was done during the summer. In Australia is winter season, it's cold. So most of the youth visiting, several of them took the seasonal flu. When they traveled back to Europe or to the North America or to Africa, they brought back a seasonal flu totally out of season because here was summer. So the risks in itself was a combination of the disease and the characteristics and the outbreak that could be created off the normal partners.
And what kind of preparedness do you think governments have put in place, or are governments prepared for any eventualities of outbreak of diseases associated with mass gatherings?
This is the excellent point and the crux of the question. On one end, we have a larger attention of the media and the politician, larger amount of funding, and this is an opportunity for the health system and for the overall country system to build a legacy after the event, not just the stadium, but a way of working together under pressure. In the past, we observed that in the planning for the risk mitigations, in disposition on the ambulances, enhancing the tests, in preparing the messaging for the visitors, enhancing the capacity of laboratory tests, all of those should be planned in a way to leave the system better off after the games. We call that legacy. And for instance, we are working with the Olympic Committee and the FIFA and the UEFA hard to make sure that the planning and the running of mass gatherings are done in a way that the overall health systems in the country is better off and that the legacy is enhanced.
Dr. Maurizio Barbesci there, speaking with Patrick Magua about how hosting a major sporting event can seriously affect the health of a nation.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank continue to depend on outside help to survive. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has appealed for just over $300 million to continue its projects in the territories. The agency says 3 years after the end of a sustained Israeli attack on Gaza, the humanitarian needs of the people there remain widespread and acute. Derek Mabata reports.
Despite an easing of access to Gaza, the situation remains difficult as a result of the ongoing Israeli blockade of the territory, according to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. The people of Gaza, the agency adds, are subjected to collective punishment, which it calls an illegal act under international law. UNRWA's Deputy Commissioner General, Margot Ellis, says the blockade also affects the agency's reconstruction efforts in Gaza.
Out of a $667 million reconstruction plan, UNRWA has been able to complete 22 projects worth some $22.5 million and is presently working on implementation of further projects worth some $115 million. This is a sizable amount and reflects good progress made, but dozens more schools and thousands of homes still need to be built.
The bulk of the money appealed for is to help meet the needs of Palestinians to survive, explains Margot Ellis.
80% of the requested funds will be used to promote food security, cash assistance, and job creation programs. A sizable portion of our appeal also aims to protect the rights of refugees and improve their access to basic emergency health, water, sanitation, education, and temporary shelter.
The Deputy Commissioner General of UNRWA says in the West Bank, forced displacements, the expansion of Israeli settlements, and settler violence are taking a devastating toll on the communities.
Since the beginning of 2011, nearly 1,100 Palestinians, including 618 children, have been displaced due to demolitions in East Jerusalem and Area C. This compares with 606 Palestinians, including 297 children displaced in 2010.
The launch of the UNRWA's appeal was done in Gaza, and Chris Gunness, the agency's spokesman, explains why this is important.
75% of UNRWA's emergency appeal is for Gaza. It makes perfect sense that we come to Gaza, the place where the emergency is most widespread, to launch this appeal. And we hope also that the eyes and ears of the world will be on Gaza. Things have really not improved significantly for many, many people. Yes, there is more construction. Yes, there are more jobs. But the fact is that the poorest of the poor, people who desperately rely on UNRWA in Gaza.
As humanitarian aid efforts continue in Gaza and the West Bank, the United Nations has been stressing the need for a final settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
This is The World with Tim Stackpool.
Of course, UN involvement in world affairs does not always lead to positive outcomes, especially when individuals cast a shadow over what would otherwise be good works. This week, 5 Uruguayan Marines who were stationed in Haiti last year serving on the post-earthquake mission were released from custody after allegations against them of assault and rape could not be substantiated. This led to protesters taking to the streets of the capital Port-au-Prince. Brian Andrews from NTN 24 has more.
In Haiti, protests against Uruguayan troops who were part of a United Nations force accused in the rape of a teenage boy this past September. 5 Uruguayan troops who had been detained by their country in connection with the rape were recently released because prosecutors say they weren't able to reach the teenager to testify in the upcoming military trial. In Montevideo, Uruguay's foreign minister, Luis Almagro, said they're hoping to find the young man because they want him to appear in the trial. Foreign Relations has spent resources and made an effort to make this court appearance happen, he says. We hope it's possible. We've asked for it on a bilateral level, along with Foreign Relations in Haiti. We've asked for it at the CELAC summit, and now we are writing them. We're also hoping the UN cooperates in this. Our main objective is to get him here to appear in court and give his version of what happened. This is key for us to clear up the facts, he said.
NTN 24's Brian Andrews with that story. Still in Latin America, and amid criticism and increasing tensions with the West, Iran's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has been touring the region, namely Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador and Cuba, where the Iranian leader gave a key lecture, met with President Raul Castro and his brother Fidel, addressed bilateral cooperation relations and corroborated Havana's support of his nuclear energy program. GRN correspondent Luis Chirino has been following the Iranian leader's trip.
Iran's Mahmoud Ahmadinejad visited Cuba on January 10th as part of a Latin American tour that has appeared to be controversial for many, given increasing tensions between the West and Tehran. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Ecuador were the countries included in Ahmadinejad's agenda, reportedly aimed at deepening bilateral friendly and cooperation relations. The newly announced European Union oil embargo on Iran, Tehran's decision to go ahead with its nuclear program, which it claims to be a peaceful energy project, its decision to close the Strait of Hormuz, the recent Iranian military exercises, and the killing just on January 10th of the 4th Iranian nuclear scientist are major factors that have seasoned the environment of Ahmadinejad's trip. Just before the Iranian leader left Tehran, the United States sent a clear warning to the 4 Latin American nations. As State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland said, "We are making absolutely clear to countries around the world that now is not the time to be deepening ties, not security ties, not economic ties with Iran." In this context, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad headed for Venezuela, where he signed a series of cooperation agreements. Later, he attended the swearing-in ceremony for Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega and arrived in Cuba on Wednesday morning. After being received by Cuban Vice President Esteban Lasso, Ahmadinejad left the Jose Marti International Airport without giving any statements to the press. Later, he reappeared, as stipulated by the announced schedule, at the main hall of the Havana University, where he was granted the honoris causa doctorate in political sciences. In his lecture, attended by Vice President Esteban Lasso, the university rector, personalities in the academic world, professors, diplomats, government officials, and students, the Iranian president focused on what he described as crucial factors for human beings to reach peace and happiness, such as justice and love for others. He criticized capitalism for having missed these values and demanded what he called a fairer world order. This was the first activity that found international media repercussion. Later in the evening, Ahmadinejad held official talks with President Raul Castro. The official press said that the two leaders exchanged views on the excellent state of bilateral relations and on international issues, and that they had ratified the country's commitment to defending peace, to international law and the UN Charter, and to the rights of all states to use nuclear energy with peaceful means. They also reaffirmed their opposition to unilateral economic sanctions. The paper said, in direct reference to Havana's support of Iran's nuclear energy program and Iran's position against the U.S. economic, financial, and commercial restrictions on Cuba, known as the American embargo. Ahmadinejad's last activity in Cuba was his meeting with former Cuban President Fidel Castro. He told reporters that bilateral relations between Havana and Tehran are excellent. Ahmadinejad was seen off at Havana's Jose Marti International Airport by his host, Raul Castro. For Global Radio News, Luis Chirino.
And that is the world for this week. If you want to learn more about the program or wish to make a contribution, then please do visit us at www.theworldradioshow.com. There you will also find a link to our Facebook page, where you can join the discussions and make comments on any of the items featured in the program. The World is committed to bringing you stories that affect the people of our planet, either on a mass or individual scale. We hope to do so with balance and integrity. As always, we welcome your input and your suggestions, so please do keep in touch at www.theworldradioshow.com. The program is produced and compiled by Tim Stackpool, with contributions sourced from right around the world, and I look forward to your company next time. Until then, bye for now.